Why did no one notice the woman who walked through the mess hall that night? Hundreds of sailors and Marines filled the space with noise and movement, trays clattering, boots thudding against the floor, conversations colliding like waves. But her presence slid through all of it, quiet, unseen, almost ghost-like. Her name was Sarah Martinez, 28 years old, logistics clerk according to her personnel file, but there was something in the way she scanned the room, something most people missed. She stood at the entrance for only a heartbeat, eyes moving with calm precision over every table, every corner, every exit. It wasn't paranoia, it was habit. A habit carved deep by years in places where forgetting to notice could get you killed. She spotted the only empty chair in the entire hall, at a corner table occupied by 4 recruits who looked like they'd barely shed the scent of boot camp. Their crisp uniforms still had that factory stiffness, their voices too loud, their laughter too eager. They were young, unscarred, untested. She exhaled softly, balancing her tray with one hand and threading through the crowd. To everyone else, she was just another face in Navy utilities. A small woman with dark hair pulled tight in a regulation bun. Nothing special. That was exactly how she liked it. What they didn't know, what no one in that hall suspected, was that she had worn a different kind of uniform once. The kind without names. The kind you earned through blood, grit, and nights where fear had a face. For 8 years she had lived in the shadows of missions that would never make the news. Afghanistan, Iraq, Somalia. Operations that existed only in sealed folders and the memories of those who survived them. But tonight she wasn't a SEAL. Not anymore. She was a clerk, exhausted from a day of paperwork, just looking for somewhere to sit and eat her dinner in peace. As she approached, the young men barely registered her. Jake Thompson, tall and broad-shouldered with a Texas drawl, was in the middle of flexing his bicep and announcing how he benched 320 pounds. Marcus Williams, a stocky kid from Detroit, interrupted him with boasts about surviving 72 sleepless hours in Hell Week simulations. David Chen, sharp-tongued Californian, rolled his eyes and threw statistics about dropout rates like punches. Tommy Rodriguez nodded, repeating family legends about Marines and SEALs as if they were scripture. Their conversation carried across the room like a challenge. Other servicemen were listening now, some amused, some irritated, but the 4 recruits were oblivious to the ripples they were making. Sarah slid her tray onto their table without a word and sat down. They didn't pause, not yet. She ate quietly, fork moving with methodical rhythm. Meatloaf, mashed potatoes, the simple meal of someone who didn't need attention. She listened as the boys debated what made a real warrior: strength, endurance, intelligence, courage, each of them certain in that naive, burn-bright way of youth that they had what it took. Jake leaned back, louder now, basking in the sound of his own confidence. "I don't care how tough it is. I've been preparing my whole life. I can do more push-ups than anyone. Run a 6-minute mile. I'm not afraid of anything." Sarah's eyes flicked up for the first time. Not afraid. She remembered saying that once too, before the first ambush, before the first body, before fear stopped being a concept and became the sound of boots running toward gunfire in the dark. She didn't correct him. Not yet. Marcus countered with a grin. "Fear isn't the issue, bro. It's about brains. I scored highest on all the intel tests. That's what matters in combat." David shook his head. "No, it's teamwork. SEALs are machines. You can't solo your way through a war zone." Tommy chimed in, almost reverent. "My dad said Special Forces guys are different, born with something extra, like they don't feel pain." Sarah nearly smiled. The myth never died. Every generation believed the same story, that elite warriors were born, not made, that they were fearless, pain-proof, larger than life, and every generation was wrong. Jake finally noticed her. "Hey," he said, leaning across the table, "you work on base, right? Ever met any real SEALs?" Sarah's voice was calm, almost soft. "A few." "Really?" Marcus leaned forward, eager. "What were they like? Were they as tough as everyone says?" She chewed slowly, swallowed, and said, "They seemed pretty normal to me." Their faces fell. David frowned. Normal, come on. These are guys who take out terrorists and rescue hostages. Tommy jumped in. Yeah, I heard they can hold their breath for 10 minutes and fight off 5 guys at once. You might be watching too many movies, Sarah said. Jake laughed, frustrated. No offense, but you probably just met them in passing. You wouldn't really know unless you saw them in action. Her eyes lingered on him a second longer. He had no idea. None of them did. Before anyone could say more, a shout split through the mess hall. 2 sailors at the far end had started shoving. A tray hit the floor with a metallic crash. Someone threw the first punch, then another. Within seconds, the scuffle erupted into a full-on brawl. 6, maybe 7 men tangled in a storm of fists and overturned chairs. The noise was explosive, shouts, curses, the splintering crack of furniture hitting tile. People froze, others backed away. The recruits jumped to their feet, adrenaline surging. Jake puffed out his chest, already stepping toward the fight like a hero in a movie. Marcus grabbed his arm. David argued they should help. Tommy bounced on his heels, indecisive. Sarah didn't move. She kept eating. Calm, unhurried. The fight raged 10 meters away, and she might as well have been at home watching the news. Jake turned to her, incredulous. Aren't you going to do something? There's a fight right there. Security will handle it, she said simply. Marcus pointed as a sailor swung a metal tray and struck another across the shoulder. Someone's gonna get hurt. People get hurt in fights, she replied without looking up. That's why smart people avoid them. David's jaw dropped. But we're military, isn't it our duty to step in? Our duty is to follow orders and complete our missions, Sarah said. I don't see any orders telling us to break up bar fights. Tommy's voice was almost pleading. My dad always said real warriors step up when there's trouble. Your dad was right about warriors, Sarah said, but he probably also taught you to pick your battles. They didn't understand. To them her composure was cowardice. They saw a small woman in uniform refusing to act and assumed fear, assumed weakness. Jake took a step closer. Come on, we outnumber them. We can break it up before security gets here. Wouldn't that be the right thing to do? She finally set her fork down and looked at him. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. You want to jump into a fight with 6 angry sailors because you think it's the right thing. Yes, Jake said, chest out. That's what heroes do. Heroes also think before they act, Sarah replied evenly. What's your plan? How do you stop 6 men without getting yourself or your friends injured? Marcus stepped forward, eager. We use our training, hand to hand. We know how to handle ourselves. Her gaze shifted slightly. Boot camp combat training against 6 sailors in a real fight. We can handle it, David said. Fear isn't the problem, Sarah echoed softly. The problem is inexperience. The fight was growing violent. Someone went down hard, motionless. Blood slicked the floor near an overturned table, and yet she sat, quiet as the storm built. Tommy suddenly moved to join in, but her hand shot out, gripping his wrist, not hard but with such controlled precision that he froze mid-step. He tried to pull away. He couldn't. Sit down, she said. It wasn't loud, but it landed with the weight of a command honed in the field. Tommy hesitated, rubbing his wrist. Let go of me. She released him instantly. I'm not holding you. You're free to get yourself beaten up if that's what you want. Jake stepped toward her, jaw set. Who do you think you are? You're just some desk worker too scared to get involved. She looked at him for a long moment. You think I'm scared? Yeah, Jake said. I think you're sitting there pretending to be calm because you're terrified. Marcus crossed his arms. David frowned. Tommy still burned with embarrassment. To them it was settled. She was a coward. Sarah slowly pushed her tray aside and stood, not fast, not dramatic, but something in the air shifted. The recruits felt it before they understood it. She straightened to her full height, not imposing physically, but there was something in her posture now, balanced, centered, controlled. "You want to know if I can handle the military lifestyle?" she asked, voice low, edged with steel. Before any of them could answer, someone at the far end of the hall pulled a knife. The room changed. Screams erupted. The brawl stopped like a film reel cutting mid-frame. A sailor with wild eyes waved a blade under the harsh cafeteria lights, cornering two terrified men against a wall. Panic swept the room. Chairs toppled. People ran for the exits. And Sarah stopped being invisible. Her body stilled, every muscle aligning in quiet readiness. Her eyes locked on the knife. Her breathing slowed. For the first time, the recruits saw her, not the clerk, not the quiet woman, but something else entirely. Something dangerous. And she hadn't even moved yet. Why did her voice sound different all of a sudden? That was the first thing Jake noticed. A moment ago, she'd been speaking softly, almost casually, like any other sailor finishing dinner after a long day. But now, when the knife flashed under the fluorescent lights and the mess hall turned into a storm of panic, Sarah Martinez's voice carried across the room with quiet authority. "Everyone stay back." Not a suggestion, a command. The kind that makes trained soldiers stop mid-stride without knowing why. The recruits froze. Jake, Marcus, David, Tommy, they all turned to look at her. She wasn't breathing hard. She wasn't panicking like everyone else who was rushing for the exits. She was focused, perfectly still like something coiled. Her eyes tracked the knife wielder's every movement, calculating distance, angle, intention. Marcus reached out, grabbing her arm. "What are you doing? He has a knife." Sarah glanced at his hand on her sleeve. Just one look, he let go as if burned. "You can't fight someone with a knife," David stammered. "You'll get killed." Her reply was quiet, steady. "I know." She stepped forward. Tommy's confusion broke through the fear. "You said to wait for security. You said not to get involved." "That was before he pulled a weapon," she said, eyes never leaving the sailor. "Now it's a different situation." The four recruits watched as she walked through the chaos with measured steps, stepping over overturned chairs and broken trays like she was on a quiet stroll. Everyone else was moving away from the danger. She was walking toward it, calm, unhurried, unafraid. Jake whispered to his friends, "She's going to get herself killed." But even as he said it, doubt crept into his voice, because something in the way she moved didn't fit the image of a terrified clerk. Her posture had shifted into something they didn't recognize, but their instincts did. Predatory, precise. The sailor with the knife was wild-eyed, either drunk or high, slashing the air and shouting threats that bled into nonsense. Two young men were cornered against the wall, their backs pressed to the cold tile, faces drained of color. One wrong move and the night would end with blood on the floor. Sarah stopped about 10 feet away, hands empty, palms visible. "Put the knife down," she said. The sailor barked a manic laugh. "Or what? You're just some little office girl." She didn't answer. She began to circle, slow and deliberate, her eyes locked on his. The recruits followed every movement, stunned. Marcus whispered, "Look how she's moving." David nodded slowly. "That's not boot camp." Tommy stared at her feet, at the way each step was placed like she'd done it 1,000 times. "They didn't teach us that." The sailor grew more agitated with each of her steps. He couldn't process it, but his instincts screamed danger. She wasn't reacting like prey. He lunged. The moment stretched. Sarah flowed around the thrust like water pouring around stone. Her left hand caught his wrist mid-strike, locking it in a grip that made him cry out. Her right elbow slammed into his solar plexus. One sharp, surgical strike. Air rushed out of him in a gasp. In the same movement, she twisted his arm behind his back, forced him face first into a table, and stripped the knife from his hand. It was over in less than 3 seconds. The mess hall fell silent. All the shouting, all the movement gone. Just the sound of metal hitting tile as the knife clattered to the floor and the distant wail of approaching security sirens. She held him pinned, his arm bent at an angle that made his screams sound more like whimpers. Her expression didn't change. No rage, no adrenaline-fueled triumph, just controlled stillness waiting for backup. Jake's mouth hung open. Did you see that? Marcus nodded slowly, eyes wide. She just took him down like it was nothing. David swallowed. That wasn't luck, that was training, real training. Tommy whispered, almost reverent, she's not logistics. Security stormed in moments later, boots pounding, commands shouted. The lead officer, a grizzled master chief, took one look at Sarah and understood. His tone changed instantly. "Ma'am, are you injured?" "Negative, Master Chief," she replied crisply. "Subject is secured and ready for transport." The recruits froze at the shift in her voice. It was clipped, professional, the language of operators giving debriefs, not clerks explaining accidents. Security cuffed the sailor and hauled him away. The Master Chief leaned in close to Sarah, speaking in low tones. The recruits couldn't hear what was said, but the respect was unmistakable. Jake elbowed Marcus. "Why's he treating her like she outranks him?" "I don't know," Marcus whispered back. "But did you see how fast she moved? That was like something out of a movie." David stared at her hands. They weren't shaking. Her breathing was steady. Most people would be buzzing with adrenaline after something like that. She looked like she'd just finished folding laundry. When the scene cleared, she returned to the table, picked up her water glass, sat down. Like nothing happened. The recruits sat too slowly, their minds reeling. Jake finally asked, "Where did you learn to fight like that?" "Here and there," she said. Marcus leaned forward. "That wasn't self-defense, that was advanced." "Military-level stuff," Jake added. Sarah raised an eyebrow, as if she hadn't noticed. David tried another angle. "The Master Chief treated you like you were someone important." "Maybe he was just being polite," she said. Tommy couldn't hold it anymore. "Come on, normal people don't move like that. Who are you?" She looked at them one by one. She saw the confusion, the suspicion, the way their earlier bravado had crumbled. "What do you think you saw?" she asked. Jake straightened. "Someone with serious combat training who took down a guy with a knife like it was easy." Marcus nodded. "Someone who's been in real fights." David added quietly, "Someone trained to kill." She didn't deny it. She didn't confirm it either. But her eyes told them David was close to the truth. Tommy tried to lighten the moment. "So, what are you, a secret agent?" She almost smiled. "Do I look like a secret agent to you?" Jake shot back. "You look like someone pretending not to be one." Before she could answer, a voice interrupted. "Excuse me," a man said. He was a lieutenant commander, older than the recruits, younger than Sarah, with the easy authority of someone used to being obeyed. He looked at Sarah. "I just wanted to thank you for your actions tonight. That could have gone very badly if you hadn't intervened." She nodded. "Just doing what needed to be done, sir." He studied her face. "Have we met? You seem familiar." "I don't think so," she replied carefully. But then his expression shifted. Recognition, shock, respect. "Wait a minute, you're Sarah Martinez," he said slowly. "The one from Somalia." The recruit stiffened. The word hit like a dropped grenade. "Somalia." Sarah's jaw tightened. "I think you have me confused with someone else, sir." But the lieutenant commander shook his head. "No, I've seen your photo in classified briefings. You're the one who pulled those hostages out 3 years ago." The recruit stared, speechless. Somalia hostage rescue, classified briefings. This wasn't a clerk. This wasn't even just a good fighter. This was someone who had lived in the kind of stories they had only heard whispered about. Why did she hesitate when the lieutenant commander said her name? For the briefest second, barely a flicker, Sarah's calm exterior cracked. Her jaw tightened, her eyes shifted toward the exits. It wasn't panic, it was calculation. In 8 years of missions, she had learned to weigh every decision in seconds: fight, flight, or silence. Right now, silence was safer. The recruits felt it. The air at the table grew heavy, charged with something they didn't yet have words for. The lieutenant commander realized his mistake as soon as the words left his mouth. He'd spoken too openly, too carelessly in front of kids who didn't understand what names like hers meant. His voice softened, diplomatic. "Of course. My apologies for the confusion." He gave her a respectful nod and walked away, but the damage was already done. Jake, Marcus, David, Tommy. They stared at her like they were seeing her for the first time. Somalia hostage rescue, classified briefings. The cafeteria around them was slowly returning to its normal rhythm, trays being collected, conversations restarting. But at that corner table, everything had shifted. Sarah remained standing for a moment, weighing her next move. Years of living in the shadows had taught her how fragile anonymity was. One careless word, one wrong look, and the quiet life she'd built on this base would fracture. Jake spoke first, his voice low. "So, Somalia." She didn't answer. Her gaze lingered on the mess hall exit like she was deciding whether to simply walk out and disappear into the night. That would have been easier. But their faces stopped her, young, uncertain, full of questions that wouldn't die. She sat back down slowly. Marcus was shaking his head, disbelief written across his face. "The hostage rescue in Somalia 3 years ago, I remember that. It was everywhere for 2 days. Then classified. Gone." David leaned forward. "They said it was Navy SEALs, an impossible mission. Everyone thought it couldn't be done." Tommy's voice was almost a whisper. 6 American aid workers, a compound surrounded by hostiles. You got them out without losing anyone. Sarah exhaled through her nose. "You boys watch too much news," she said quietly. But Jake wasn't buying the deflection anymore. "The lieutenant commander recognized you. He knew your name, classified briefings. You can't pretend that's nothing." She tried to hold the line. "People make mistakes." But the way she said it, soft, tired, made it clear even to them that she wasn't denying it. Not really. Marcus leaned forward, connecting dots in real time. "The way you moved when you took that guy down, that wasn't training for show. That was professional, like watching a machine." "Like watching a killer," David said softly. The word hung between them, heavy and honest. She didn't flinch. She'd heard it before, sometimes spat as an insult, sometimes whispered as a necessity. Both were true. Tommy studied her face. "How many people have you killed?" The question came out clumsy, almost childlike in its bluntness. But Sarah didn't snap at him. She just looked at him with the same calm eyes she'd had when facing the knife. "That's not really dinner conversation, is it?" she said quietly. Jake leaned forward, his voice almost pleading. "Come on, we're military, we understand combat, service. We're not kids." Sarah laughed then, not mockingly but hollow. Do you really understand what combat means?" The recruits exchanged uncomfortable glances. They had completed basic training. They had learned to shoot, to run, to fight on mats under fluorescent lights. In their minds, they were ready for war. Marcus spoke defensively. "We've been trained." "Trained?" Sarah echoed, her voice sharp but not cruel. "You've been trained to follow orders, march in formation, hit targets on a clean range. That's not combat." David bristled. "We're ready to serve our country, just like you did." She held his gaze for a long, quiet moment. "I hope you never have to find out if that's true." Jake's frustration boiled over. "Why won't you just tell us who you are? We already know you're not some logistics clerk." "Because," Sarah said slowly, choosing each word with surgical care, "some things are better left unknown." Tommy tried a softer angle. "Look, we're not going to tell anyone. We just want to understand. Half an hour ago, you were lecturing us about not getting involved in fights. Then you took down a knife-wielding sailor like it was nothing." "Maybe I changed my mind," she said. Marcus shook his head. No one changes their mind like that. No one moves like that without years of training. Silence stretched between them. She could feel their curiosity pulling at her like a tide. She'd spent years living with secrets that had no safe place in the light. But these weren't strangers. They were recruits, the same kind of wide-eyed kids she'd once been. She looked at each of them. Young, naive, hungry for answers, hungry for something to believe in. "What do you want to know?" she asked finally. Jake didn't hesitate. "Are you a Navy SEAL?" Her eyes softened for the first time. She didn't dodge. "I was." The table fell utterly silent. David leaned in. "What do you mean, was?" "I mean," she said quietly, "I did that job for 8 years, and now I do a different one." Marcus frowned. "But once you're a SEAL, aren't you always?" "The training stays," she interrupted gently. "The mindset stays, but not everyone wants to stay in special operations forever." Tommy shook his head slowly, awed. "You're really a Navy SEAL, like for real?" "I was," she corrected softly. "Now I process supply requisitions and file paperwork." Jake couldn't contain his confusion. But why? Why give up being part of the most elite force in the world to push paper? Her expression shifted then. The confidence, the calm, it stayed, but something deeper surfaced. Tiredness. A shadow that didn't come from physical exhaustion. "Because after a while," she said slowly, "you get tired of seeing things most people never have to see. You get tired of doing things most people never have to do." Her voice wasn't bitter. It was honest, and it hit them harder than any boast could have. The recruits stared at her, suddenly aware of how little they actually understood about the world they had signed up to serve. David's voice was quieter now, filled with respect. "So when we were sitting here bragging about wanting to be SEALs, you knew exactly what we were talking about." She looked at him. "I was sitting here knowing you had no idea what you were talking about." The truth landed like a physical weight. They remembered their bravado, the bench presses, the Hell Week simulations, the fantasies about heroism. They remembered laughing about who would make it first. And all the while, the real thing had been sitting across from them, silent, eating meatloaf. Jake's cheeks burned with embarrassment. "We must have sounded like complete idiots to you." She shook her head. "You sounded like every recruit who's ever dreamed of joining special operations. There's nothing wrong with having goals." Marcus's voice cracked with a mix of shame and realization. "But we were acting like experts, talking about something we don't even understand." "Everyone starts as a beginner," Sarah said, "even SEALs." David leaned back, feeling deflated. "Yeah, but not everyone makes it." "No," she agreed softly, "not everyone does." What separated those who made it from those who did? That was the question hanging in the air, unspoken but heavy. 4 young recruits leaned forward, eyes fixed on her, their earlier bravado stripped away. For the first time since she'd sat down, Sarah Martinez felt their silence. Not the loud, naive confidence of boys chasing glory, but the quiet, searching gaze of people beginning to understand the weight of what they'd asked for. Jake spoke first, hesitantly. Do you think any of us have what it takes to make it?" She didn't answer right away. Her eyes moved slowly between them, Jake's eager defiance, Marcus's stubborn pride, David's sharp but untested logic, Tommy's restless energy. She saw versions of people she'd once trained beside, some who made it, most who didn't. "I don't know," she said finally. They blinked, surprised by the honesty. They'd expected either validation or rejection, not uncertainty. Marcus leaned in. "What do you mean you do know?" She folded her hands on the table. Her tone wasn't dismissive, it was thoughtful, almost surgical. "Physically, you all have what's required. You're young, healthy, in good shape. But that's true of thousands who try every year. Most don't make it. It's not about muscles. Not really." David pressed, his analytical mind hungry for a formula. "Then what is it about, beyond the physical?" She looked down briefly, remembering faces, mud-caked, hollow-eyed, screaming into the cold Pacific surf at 2 in the morning. Voices that had cracked under weight no drill instructor could simulate. She looked back up. "Some people surprise you," she said softly. "Guys who look perfect on paper quit in the first week. Others who seem like they have no chance claw their way through. You can't always tell by looking." Tommy frowned. There has to be some way, some sign. She considered this. There are signs, but they're not the kind you can measure on a test. How do you handle failure? How do you respond when someone is in your face screaming, tearing you down, breaking you apart? Can you function when you're exhausted, freezing, and every part of your body is begging you to quit? Jake straightened, trying to sound confident. "I think we could handle it." She tilted her head slightly. Thinking you can handle it and actually handling it are two very different things. For a moment she drifted not to the mess hall but to a beach years ago. Cold water lapping at her boots, log PT at dawn, sand grinding into every crease of her skin, her instructor's voice screaming through the fog. She remembered the moment she almost rang out. Everyone had one. Some did it. Some didn't. The difference had never been physical. She came back to the present. "The ones who make it," she said, "aren't always the strongest, or the fastest, or the smartest. They're the ones who refuse to quit, even when quitting would be the rational choice. They're the ones who care more about their team than themselves. The ones who can admit when they're wrong and keep learning." Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "We made a lot of assumptions tonight, about you, about SEALs, about ourselves." She gave a small nod. "Yes, you did." David exhaled slowly. "We called you a coward." She almost smiled. "You judged a situation based on limited information. That's a mistake, but it's one you can learn from." Tommy stared at her. "When you took that guy down, you didn't hesitate. You weren't angry. You weren't excited. You were just present," she finished for him. He nodded. Her eyes softened. "Violence should never be exciting. If you enjoy hurting people, you don't belong in special operations. You belong in prison." Jake frowned. "So how do you do it? How do you use violence when you have to, without becoming someone who enjoys it?" Her answer came without pause. "You remember why you're doing it. You're not fighting because you want to hurt someone. You're fighting to protect people who can't protect themselves. You're fighting to complete a mission that matters more than your fear, more than your comfort." The recruits fell quiet. Her voice wasn't rehearsed. It came from somewhere real. For a moment she hesitated. There was more she could say, more she'd kept buried. But these boys had asked a question that deserved more than cliches. So she took a breath and let herself look back further, before the trident, before the missions. "I had a brother," she said softly. The words landed gently but drew their full attention. She hadn't mentioned family before. "He was Army, killed in Iraq during my first deployment," she continued, her voice steady but lower now. "IED. I was sitting on a ship in the Persian Gulf when the message came through. Safe, warm, and he was—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. The silence carried it. "I decided after that," she said, "that if I was going to wear this uniform, I'd do it in a way that actually made a difference. Not just push papers, not just watch." Jake swallowed hard. "Did you make a difference?" She looked him in the eye. "I did my job. Whether that made a difference is for other people to decide." Marcus spoke carefully. "When you were on missions, were you ever scared?" A quiet laugh escaped her. "Every single time. Anyone who says they're not scared in combat is either lying or broken inside." David tilted his head. "But you still did it." "Fear is information," she said. "It tells you you're in danger. It reminds you to pay attention. It doesn't tell you to quit." Tommy leaned forward. "What was the hardest part, the training or the missions?" She considered that for a long moment, staring past them as if looking through time. "The hardest part," she said finally, "is learning to live with the things you have to do. The training ends. The missions end. But the memories stay." Her voice didn't waver, but something in her eyes flickered, a shadow that none of them could fully understand. The recruits sat in silence, absorbing her words. They weren't watching a movie hero. They were listening to someone who had carried the real thing, the weight, the fear, the choices no one celebrated. Jake broke the silence quietly. "Do you regret it?" She met his eyes. "I regret some of the things I had to do, some of the things I saw, but I don't regret serving, and I don't regret protecting the people who couldn't protect themselves." Marcus glanced around the mess hall, the same space where they'd been laughing and bragging less than an hour ago. It felt different now. Smaller, more fragile. "Is that why you stepped in tonight?" he asked. "To protect those sailors?" "Partly," she admitted, "but also because I know what happens when good people stand by and do nothing." David looked at her carefully, as if seeing both the soldier and the woman at once. "You're not what I expected." She tilted her head. "What did you expect?" "Someone bigger," he admitted. "More aggressive, more obvious." She smiled faintly. "The most dangerous people are often the ones you don't see coming." Tommy gestured toward where the fight had been. "Yeah, we definitely didn't see that coming." "That's the point," she said. "Real professionals don't advertise their capabilities. They just do what needs to be done when it needs to be done." For the first time, the four recruits weren't just curious. They were listening, really listening. And Sarah, for the first time in a long time, she let a piece of her story breathe. Why do some stories stay buried? That thought drifted through Sarah's mind as the mess hall settled into its late-night lull. The noise had faded. The four recruits sat with her now in a quiet that felt almost sacred, their trays forgotten, their postures changed. Gone was the swagger, the restless energy. In its place was something rarer, attention. They were listening not like students to a lecture, but like people who had just glimpsed a different world, one they had spent months romanticizing, and now, for the first time, were beginning to fear in the way you should fear the ocean, with respect. Marcus broke the silence softly. "You said the memories stay. How do you live with them?" Her eyes lowered for a moment. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she traced her finger slowly along the rim of her water glass, as if drawing circles around something invisible. "Some nights," she said finally, "you don't. Some nights you lie awake and replay everything you could have done differently, every face, every sound, every decision that mattered. You learn to live with ghosts. Some of them get quieter with time, some don't." Jake leaned forward. "But you still keep going." Her gaze lifted to meet his. "You keep going because stopping isn't an option. You learn to carry the weight instead of waiting for it to disappear." Tommy exhaled slowly, processing her words. "That sounds hard." "It is," she said plainly. "But it's not hopeless. You find ways to anchor yourself. Some people lean on their teammates, some on family, some on faith. Me, I leaned on my team. The people who stood beside me when everything was falling apart." David asked, "Was it like they say, that bond, the brotherhood?" A quiet smile touched her lips, not of amusement but of memory. "It's not a slogan, it's real. When you're out there, your life is in their hands and theirs in yours. There's no pretending, no posturing. You either trust them or you die. That kind of bond doesn't vanish. Even now, years later, I could call any one of them in the middle of the night and they'd pick up without asking why." Marcus's voice softened. "And now?" She hesitated. This was the part no one liked to talk about. Now most of us are scattered. Some are still in. Some are gone. Some didn't make it home the way they left. The missions end, but the bond doesn't. It just changes shape. Jake's brow furrowed. "What about you? Why did you leave?" She looked down at her hands, flexing them slowly as if remembering the feel of a rifle stock, the coarse grip of wet rope, the cold steel of a door handle in the dark. "Because after enough time," she said, "you start realizing that the job never takes from you all at once. It takes piece by piece, sleep, joy, certainty. It carves little spaces in you that you can't fill back up. I loved the work, but I didn't want it to be the only thing left of me. David watched her carefully. Did it change you? Yes, she said simply. It has to. You can't see what we see, do what we do, and come out the same person. The trick isn't to avoid change. It's to make sure it doesn't turn you into someone you can't live with. Tommy leaned forward. Was there a moment when you knew you were done? She nodded slowly. There was. The recruits leaned in instinctively, sensing the gravity in her tone. She didn't dramatize the story. She didn't need to. It was a winter night, she said softly. Afghanistan. We were deep inside enemy territory targeting a compound. Everything was going according to plan until it was. An ambush. 2 of our guys went down. I got one of them out. The other, he was hit bad. We set up a perimeter and called for extraction, but the clock was against us. I remember looking at him in the snow, his breath coming shallow, blood soaking through his gear. And I realized for the first time I wasn't thinking about the mission. I was thinking about how tired I was, not physically. Soul tired, tired of pulling people out of hell, tired of watching others not make it. That night when it was over, I knew something in me had shifted. I finished the deployment. I did my job, but I knew I was leaving when I got home. No one spoke. The mess hall, mostly empty now, seemed to grow still around her words. Jake's voice came quietly. What happened to him, the one you couldn't save? Her eyes met his. There was no bitterness, only quiet acceptance. He died before the bird got there. We did everything we could. Sometimes everything isn't enough. David pressed gently. How do you live with that? She didn't hesitate. You don't bury it, you carry it. You give it a place inside you where it won't rot. You remember their names, their faces. You don't let them become statistics. That's the only way I know. The recruits sat with her words like soldiers sitting beside a fire in the cold, close, silent, reverent. Tommy broke the silence with a confession. When we were talking earlier, bragging about training, push-ups, running times, I thought being a SEAL was about proving something, about being the toughest, the best. Sarah's eyes softened, but her voice was firm. It's not about proving anything. It's about giving everything. And sometimes it's about losing more than you ever expected. Marcus rubbed the back of his neck. I thought fear was the enemy, but it sounds like fear's part of it. It is, she said. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's what you decide to do while it's standing in front of you. Jake looked at her with newfound respect. Not the shallow admiration of someone hearing war stories, but the quiet respect of someone who's glimpsed the price tag attached to those stories. For a while no one spoke. The silence wasn't awkward. It was the kind that exists when truth finally settles in a room. Sarah leaned back in her chair, exhaling slowly. She wasn't used to talking this much. Most of what she carried stayed locked away, safe behind clearances and silence. But tonight, something in their faces, something about their youth, their honesty, their untested courage, had opened a door she hadn't expected to open again. Whatever path you choose, she said finally, understand this, the uniform doesn't make you special. The trident doesn't make you invincible, and the missions won't make you whole. If you choose this life, you choose the weight that comes with it. No one escapes that. Jake swallowed. Would you do it again? Her answer came after a long, heavy pause. Yes, she said, but I'd walk into it knowing exactly what it would cost. Why did their questions suddenly sound different? An hour ago, the 4 recruits had spoken like men who thought they already knew the answers, about training, toughness, and heroism. But now their voices carried something else. Not arrogance, not bravado, something quieter, heavier. Respect. The mess hall had mostly emptied. The harsh fluorescent lights had softened to a low, late-night hum. Trays were stacked. Conversations were reduced to murmurs at distant tables. It felt like a small island of truth had formed at the corner where Sarah Martinez sat with them. David was the first to break the silence. His voice wasn't sharp anymore. It was careful. Can I ask you something personal? She looked at him, her expression unreadable but not closed. "You can ask." He hesitated. "Why did you tell us all this? You could have just walked away, pretended we never saw what happened with the knife." Sarah leaned back slightly, folding her arms, eyes drifting toward the far wall as if the answer lived somewhere in the distance. "Because one day, someone is going to stand where you stood tonight, watching chaos unfold, and they'll have to decide who they are in that moment. I can't make that decision for you, but maybe I can help you understand what it really costs." Jake absorbed her words in silence. Earlier that evening, he had imagined himself in her place, calm, heroic, stepping into danger like the protagonists of the stories he grew up on. Now that fantasy felt small, thin. He'd seen the way she moved, the way she spoke afterward, not like someone chasing glory, but someone who had seen too much to romanticize it anymore. Tommy leaned forward, elbows on the table. "So, if one of us really wanted to try for it, SEALs or something like it, what should we know? Really know, not the recruiting posters, the truth." Sarah studied his face for a long moment, then she nodded slowly. "All right." Her voice changed, not the commanding tone from earlier and not the distant reminiscence from before. This was quieter, intentional. "First," she said, "you need to understand why you're doing it. If it's about proving you're the toughest or impressing people, you'll break. This job will find that weakness and tear it wide open. You need a reason that doesn't crumble when everything inside you screams to quit." Jake frowned slightly. "Like what kind of reason?" "Something bigger than yourself," she said simply. "For me, it was my brother. For others, it's their teammates, their families, their country. It doesn't matter what it is as long as it's real." David leaned in, "And after that?" "Second," she continued, "you prepare your mind as much as your body. Everyone focuses on running times and push-ups. That's the easy part. What breaks people is the cold, the exhaustion, the doubt. You have to train yourself to function when everything hurts, when you're freezing, hungry, and every part of you wants to stop." Tommy's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "Like Hell Week." She gave a small nod. "Hell Week is just a glimpse. It's not about testing your body. It's about showing you who you are when the mask slips." Marcus spoke next, his usual confidence replaced by quiet seriousness. "And teamwork." Her expression softened. "That's the third thing. Special operations isn't about lone wolves. Movies get that wrong. It's about a group of people accomplishing the impossible together. If you can't put the team first, truly first, you won't last." David frowned. "But doesn't that ever wear on you, carrying other people's lives like that?" Her eyes grew distant for a moment. "Yes, every day you carry their lives, and if something happens to them, you carry that too, forever." The recruits didn't flinch. They didn't shift nervously like they might have before. They held her gaze, absorbing every word. Tommy's voice was quieter now. "Why do it then, if it costs so much?" Her answer was soft. "Because sometimes, standing between the world and the darkness is the only thing that feels honest. Because someone has to." Silence settled again, not empty but full. Jake broke it this time. "What happens after, when you leave, do you just stop?" She exhaled through her nose slowly, thinking. "You never really stop. The uniform comes off, but the memories don't. The instincts don't. You learn to live in a world that moves slower than the one you knew. Some people adjust, some don't." Marcus's brow furrowed. "You adjusted." "Eventually," she said. "It took time and distance. That's why I transferred to logistics. I needed quiet. I needed something ordinary." David studied her carefully. "Do you miss it?" She paused. The answer wasn't simple. "Some parts. Not the pain, not the loss, but the clarity. In the field, everything mattered, every breath, every step. There's something brutally honest about that kind of life." Jake nodded slowly, understanding something he hadn't earlier. She wasn't a legend because of what she'd done. She was a legend because she'd survived it and learned to carry it without letting it consume her. For the first time since the conversation began, She looked at each of them not as naive recruits, but as future operators, some of whom might one day face the same crossroads she had. "You asked me earlier if any of you have what it takes," she said quietly. "I still don't know. None of us can know until it happens. But I see something in all four of you, something I saw in a few of the ones who made it." Jake blinked. "What's that?" "You listened when it mattered," she said simply. "You didn't double down when you realized you were wrong. You opened your eyes. That matters more than you think." Tommy shifted, a little awkward. "We also called you a coward." Sarah's mouth curved into a faint smile. "Yes, you did. And then you learned why you were wrong. That's growth. Don't underestimate it." David looked at her with something close to admiration. "You could have humiliated us tonight, rubbed it in, but you didn't." "That's not the point," she said. "You don't build better soldiers by tearing them down. You build them by showing them the truth and letting them decide who they want to become." Jake glanced at the clock. It was well past mess hours, but none of them wanted to leave. They'd come into the hall as loud, cocky recruits. Now they felt like they'd been given a glimpse into a hidden world, one carved not by glory, but by pain, duty, and quiet resilience. Marcus leaned forward, almost whispering. "If you could go back to before it all began, before Bud S., before the missions, what would you tell yourself?" Her eyes softened, but the answer was immediate. "I'd tell her, you'll lose more than you ever thought possible, but you'll also find out exactly who you are, and that truth is worth it." The recruits sat in silence, their faces reflecting a mix of awe and something new, resolve. And for the first time in years, Sarah Martinez felt something she hadn't expected tonight. Not nostalgia, not pain. Hope. Why did none of them move when the clock struck midnight? The mess hall was nearly deserted now, lights dimmed, echoing with the faint hum of refrigerators and distant footsteps. Outside, the base slept under a cold sky. But at that corner table, four recruits sat anchored to their seats, as if leaving would break something fragile that had formed between them and the woman across the table. For the first time since they'd joined the Navy, they weren't performing. They weren't competing for who could speak louder, run faster, or brag harder. They were just being honest. Tommy spoke first, his voice softer than anyone had ever heard it. "You talked about reasons earlier, why you joined, why you stayed, why you left. I've never really said mine out loud." Sarah didn't say anything. She didn't push. She simply looked at him, giving him the kind of patient silence only someone who's listened to hundreds of confessions in far darker places can give. Tommy's fingers traced the edge of his tray absent-mindedly. "My dad was a Marine, tough as hell. He used to tell me stories about deployments, about how his unit was like family, how they always had each other's backs. He'd never admit it, but I could tell he missed it when he got out. When I enlisted, I guess, I wanted to feel what he felt, to belong to something that meant more than just me." Sarah nodded slowly. "Wanting to belong isn't weakness, it's human. But remember, belonging in this world means earning that trust with everything you are. It's not given lightly." Tommy met her eyes and nodded, a seriousness in his expression that hadn't been there before. Marcus shifted next, looking uncomfortable. He wasn't used to vulnerability. "I joined because, where I grew up, there weren't many options. The Navy was my way out, a way to prove everyone wrong, to show that I could be more than what they expected." His voice cracked on the last word. Sarah leaned forward slightly. "There's nothing wrong with wanting to rise above where you came from, but if proving people wrong is your only fuel, it'll burn out when things get dark. You have to want something beyond that, something that's yours, not theirs." He nodded slowly, absorbing that like someone hearing hard truth for the first time. David, always the analytical one, spoke next, but his tone was different now, less like a man with answers, more like someone asking himself questions as he went. "I've always been good at solving problems, strategy, logistics. I thought special operations needed people who could think fast under pressure. I thought maybe that was my edge. Sarah tilted her head. It is, but thinking won't save you when you're freezing in the surf at 3 a.m., sleep-deprived, and someone's screaming in your face that you're not good enough. That's when strategy turns into something simpler. Do I quit or do I take the next breath? If you can do that, one breath at a time, you'll find out who you are. David swallowed. For the first time, he didn't try to counter, he just nodded. Finally, Jake, the loudest voice from earlier in the night, was quiet. His jaw was tight. His hands were clasped together on the table. When he finally spoke, it was low, unsteady. I always thought fear was the enemy, that if I could just be tough enough, strong enough, I'd be ready for anything. I looked at guys like you, SEALs, operators, and thought you were fearless, untouchable. I wanted to be that. Sarah didn't interrupt. She knew what was coming next. But tonight, Jake continued, his voice roughening, watching you take that guy down, listening to you talk about the things you've lived through, I realized I've been chasing an idea, not reality. You weren't fearless. You were prepared. You were honest about what it cost. He exhaled slowly, his shoulders loosening as if shedding a weight. I guess I joined because I wanted to be somebody who could stand when it mattered, but I didn't understand what that really meant. For a long moment, Sarah said nothing. She just looked at each of them. 4 young men, 4 different reasons, 4 different versions of the same hunger. She leaned forward, her voice low and steady. Here's something no recruiter will tell you. Special operations isn't just a job. It's a mirror. It will show you exactly who you are when everything else is stripped away. If you walk into it lying to yourself about why you're there, it will find that lie and break you with it. The recruit sat perfectly still. Her words didn't feel like advice. They felt like a warning wrapped in hard-earned truth. Tommy hesitated, then asked, "What about when it gets too heavy, when the weight's too much?" Her eyes softened, but her answer came without hesitation. Then you lean on your team, and if you don't have one yet, you hold on to the reason you started. You don't have to carry the weight alone. No one makes it through alone. Marcus rubbed his hands together. You talk like it's less about glory and more about survival. Sarah almost smiled. That's because it is. Glory fades, survival stays. David's voice was thoughtful. You sound like a mentor. She raised an eyebrow slightly. I'm not here to mentor anyone. I'm just telling you the truth most people don't hear until it's too late. Jake met her eyes. Then maybe you should be a mentor, I mean. The words caught her off guard. For a moment, something flickered behind her expression, a memory maybe of younger teammates looking at her the way these 4 were now. She cleared her throat, her tone softening just slightly. I'm not that person anymore. That part of my life is behind me. Tommy tilted his head. Is it? You may not wear the trident now, but you just spent hours giving us more than anyone else ever has. She didn't reply, not right away, but something shifted inside her, a small, almost imperceptible thaw. The recruits looked at one another. Something had changed among them too. They had entered the mess hall as 4 loud voices competing to be heard. Now they sat like a unit, not yet forged but tempered. Sarah stood slowly, collecting her tray. The recruits instinctively straightened in their seats, as if in the presence of an officer, though she'd given no such command. You don't owe me anything, she said. What you do with what you heard tonight is on you, but if you choose that path, walk into it with your eyes open. Not everyone gets that chance. Jake rose halfway from his chair. Wait, if we wanted to talk again about this, could we? She looked at him for a moment, then at the others. Their faces weren't cocky anymore. They were earnest, honest. We'll see, she said softly. I tend to keep a low profile these days. And then she turned and walked toward the exit, quiet as she'd entered, her footsteps soft against the tile. None of them spoke as she disappeared into the hallway. They didn't need to. Something had changed in all 4 of them. They had come here hungry for validation. They were leaving with something far more valuable. Why did the silence feel heavier than anything they'd said all night? The mess hall door swung shut behind her with a soft metallic click, leaving the four recruits alone at the table. No words, no nervous laughter, just the hum of the lights and the echo of her voice still hanging in the air. Jake leaned back slowly, running both hands through his hair. What the hell just happened? Tommy exhaled, almost a laugh but not quite. I think we just got a glimpse of the real thing. David's fingers tapped against the table in measured rhythm, like he was cataloging every sentence, every pause, every lesson she'd given them. Marcus stared at the door, jaw set, not with defiance this time but with something like resolve. They sat there for a long moment, each lost in their own thoughts. Earlier that evening their world had been simple: train hard, prove themselves, wear the uniform with pride. But now it felt different, larger, heavier. Jake broke the silence first, his voice low. She didn't say it, but she's been through hell. Tommy nodded. Yeah, and she didn't brag about any of it, she just carried it. David spoke next, quieter. That's what struck me. She wasn't trying to impress us. She was warning us. Marcus leaned forward, elbows on the table, his voice steady. And she was testing us, not with drills, with truth, seeing if we'd actually listen. For a moment, none of them felt like recruits anymore. They felt like men standing at the base of a mountain, finally able to see how steep the climb truly was. Jake stared down at his hands. I came here thinking I was ready, that all it took was strength and guts, but she made me realize I've got a lot to figure out about myself first. Tommy nodded slowly. Same. I've been chasing my dad's shadow, wanting to feel like I belong to something bigger, but I never thought about the weight that comes with that. David's voice was quiet, thoughtful. I've been treating this like a puzzle, something I could outthink, but you can't strategize your way through pain. You endure it or you don't. Marcus's gaze hardened, not in arrogance but in clarity. She told me proving people wrong wouldn't be enough. And she's right. I've been running from where I came from, not running toward who I want to be. They exchanged glances. No speeches. No vows spoken aloud. But in that silence something was forged, a shared understanding that their journey would be longer, harder, and far more real than they'd imagined. Finally Jake stood, pushing his chair back. We should go. PT starts at 500. But none of them moved right away. There was a weight to leaving the table, as if walking away meant admitting that something extraordinary had just happened. Tommy broke the spell with a half-smile. You think she'll talk to us again? David shrugged. Maybe, but even if she doesn't, I think she's already said everything we needed to hear. Marcus nodded slowly. Yeah, it's on us now. They stood together, almost instinctively falling into step as they walked toward the door. No one led. No one followed. For the first time, they walked like a unit. Outside, the night air was cold and sharp. The stars above the base stretched endlessly, indifferent and constant. As they made their way across the empty quad, Jake glanced back at the mess hall. She was gone, but the feeling remained. Meanwhile, a few buildings away, Sarah Martinez sat alone in her quarters. The lights were off. The room was quiet except for the distant sound of boots on pavement. She sat on the edge of her bunk, elbows on her knees, staring at the floor. She hadn't planned on talking tonight. She hadn't planned on revealing pieces of herself she'd carefully locked away for years. She'd come to the mess hall for a quiet meal, nothing more. But life had a way of cracking open doors she thought were sealed shut. She reached into the small metal locker beside her bed and pulled out a folded piece of fabric, a tattered American flag that had flown on a mission years ago. It was worn, edges frayed, colors faded by dust and time. For a long moment she just held it in her hands, fingers tracing the stitching. Memories rose, not in cinematic flashes but in quiet fragments. The feel of wet sand during training, the crack of a rifle in the dark, a teammate's laugh on a freezing night, a radio transmission that ended too soon. She closed her eyes. For the first time in a long time she wasn't weighed down by those memories. She wasn't escaping them. She was sitting with them. And somewhere in the quiet, she realized something unexpected. Those 4 recruits had reminded her of something she'd forgotten. Not the fight, not the fear. The why. She folded the flag carefully, set it back in the locker, and closed the door with quiet finality. Maybe she wasn't a mentor, not officially, not anymore. But maybe the world still had a way of finding people like her when the next generation needed someone to tell them the truth. She lay back on her bunk, staring at the ceiling. For the first time in months, her chest felt lighter. The ghosts were still there. They always would be, but tonight they were quiet. Outside, the base carried on, training, preparing, dreaming. Somewhere out there, 4 young men were walking back to their barracks with new eyes and heavier hearts. And Sarah Martinez, the woman they'd once mistaken for a coward, closed her eyes and breathed in the cold night air through an open window. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.